It was a crisp fall afternoon when Barron Trump, now a teenager, found himself walking down the familiar street that once felt like a battleground. He had grown up in the glitzy, high-profile world of New York City, but it wasn't always the glamorous life people assumed. As a child, Barron had faced his share of struggles, most notably with a boy named Jake, who had tormented him throughout his early years. Jake had been a bully, always quick to pick on Barron for his height, his unique family dynamics, and for simply being different from the rest of the kids at school. Barron, the shy, reserved son of Donald Trump, was an easy target for the popular crowd. But time had passed, and Barron had grown, both in stature and in character. Today, Barron was returning to the old neighborhood, a place he hadn't set foot in for years. The streets that had once been filled with the taunting laughter of his tormentor now felt strangely quiet. Barron's mission was clear. He wanted to confront his past, confront the person who had made his childhood difficult, and perhaps, in doing so, gain closure. He reached the familiar corner store where he and Jake had once fought over petty things, and to his surprise, he saw him standing across the street. Jake, now in his 20s, looked much different. He had lost his youthful bravado and had the look of someone who had been through more than he cared to admit. Barron took a deep breath and crossed the street, walking directly toward the man who had once made him feel small. Jake noticed him and froze for a moment, his face showing a mix of surprise and confusion. Barron didn't speak at first, just stood there, looking at Jake. The years of hurt, frustration, and confusion seemed to hang in the air between them, unspoken but tangible. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "Barron, is that really you?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Barron nodded, his tall frame towering over Jake's slightly shorter one. "Yeah, it's me." There was no anger in his voice, only calm determination. "I've been thinking about this moment for a long time. I think it's time we talk." Jake looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The bravado that had once characterized him was now gone, replaced with an almost apologetic demeanor. "Look, man," Jake began, scratching the back of his head. I don't even know what to say. We were kids, right?" Barron's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He was giving Jake a chance to explain, but deep down, Barron knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy. Jake continued, his voice faltering. "I guess I was just, I don't know, insecure. And, yeah, I took it out on you. I'm sorry, Barron. I really am. I didn't know what I was doing back then." Barron stood there, processing Jake's words. He had heard many apologies in his life, but this one felt different. There was no excuse for what Jake had done to him. But Barron could see the vulnerability in his eyes. Jake wasn't the same cocky kid he used to be. "Do you even remember how bad you were?" Barron asked softly, his voice steady. "You made my life miserable. I couldn't even go to school without feeling like everyone was against me because of you." Jake nodded, his eyes downcast. I know, man. I was a jerk. Barron raised his hand, stopping Jake. "It's not about the apologies. It's about the change. I've changed, and I hope you have, too." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The weight of the past seemed to lift off Barron's shoulders, the years of resentment slowly melting away. It was a powerful feeling, a feeling of freedom. He wasn't sure exactly when it happened, but he had forgiven Jake. Not because he was obligated to, but because Barron had become someone who didn't carry grudges anymore. He had learned to rise above the things that tried to bring him down. "I've had a lot of time to think about my life, and honestly, I'm not the person I used to be either," Barron said, his voice now carrying a sense of quiet confidence. "You're not the same person either, are you?" Jake slowly shook his head, a small smile creeping onto his face. "No, I'm not. And, honestly, I think I owe you one for this. I don't expect you to forgive me, but thanks." There was a long pause as Barron considered Jake's words. "Maybe we were both just lost back then," he said finally. Maybe we were both just trying to figure out who we were, and we didn't know how to do it. Jake nodded, and for the first time in years, the two of them shared a moment of understanding. It wasn't about the past anymore. It wasn't about the bullying or the pain. It was about the fact that they had both grown, had both become different people than they once were. "I'm glad you said that," Barron said, offering a small, genuine smile. "Because, you know what? I'm stronger now. And I'm not just talking about how much taller I am." Jake chuckled softly, and for the first time, Barron realized that the boy who had once made his life miserable was now standing in front of him, a man who had learned, just as Barron had, what it meant to face one's past and make amends. As they parted ways, Barron turned back to look at Jake. "Take care of yourself, all right," he said. Jake nodded, and as he watched Barron walk away, there was a look of respect in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Barron had faced his childhood bully, and in doing so, he had come to understand that true strength didn't come from fighting back. It came from letting go and moving forward. It was a quiet redemption, one that didn't come with fanfare or applause, but one that was felt deep within. Barron had healed, and so had Jake, and that, in itself, was a victory. As Barron walked away from the meeting with Jake, something within him felt lighter. The long years of resentment had slowly been washed away in that brief conversation. He had entered that street with a purpose, not knowing exactly how it would unfold. But now, as he made his way home, there was a sense of quiet satisfaction settling in. He had gained something he hadn't realized he was missing: peace. In the days that followed, Barron found himself reflecting on the confrontation with Jake, recalling the way their words had shifted from anger and blame to understanding and acceptance. It had been an unexpected turn of events, and yet Barron felt a sense of clarity. Life wasn't always about winning or getting revenge. Sometimes, it was simply about finding closure and allowing space for personal growth. The news of their interaction spread quickly, as anyone who had witnessed it couldn't help but talk about the moment when Barron Trump, son of the former president, confronted his childhood bully, not with fists or harsh words, but with the maturity and wisdom of someone who had learned how to rise above his past. Some called it a moment of self-discovery. Others saw it as an example of how true strength came from forgiveness. As Barron's story reached the public, many people who had experienced similar challenges in their own lives began to share their stories. Messages of support flooded social media, and Barron soon found himself hearing from people he'd never met, those who had struggled with bullying, exclusion, or self-doubt. It was humbling, and Barron began to realize that what had happened between him and Jake wasn't just about personal redemption. It was about inspiring others to face their own fears, their own pasts, and come to terms with them. Barron's mother, Melania Trump, was the first to notice the change in her son. She had seen him grow up under the constant scrutiny of the public eye, but she knew how difficult it had been for him to navigate those early years. Barron had always been the quiet one, the one who preferred to stay out of the limelight. Yet, seeing him so at peace with himself was something Melania hadn't expected. She watched as Barron spoke about the importance of emotional strength, of learning to forgive, not only others but oneself. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Melania looked at Barron with a smile that carried both pride and understanding. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" she asked. Barron nodded, his usual reserved demeanor softening just a little. "Yeah, I think I have." Melania reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "I'm proud of you, Barron, not just for what you've done for yourself, but for the way you've handled everything. You've shown a level of maturity that many people take years to develop." Barron glanced up at his mother, grateful for her unwavering support. He realized in that moment that while he had been on a journey to confront his past, he had also been on a path of self-discovery, of learning to embrace the person he was becoming. The days that followed brought more than just personal reflection. Barron found that the lessons he had learned through his encounter with Jake were beginning to affect the way he interacted with the world. He started reaching out to others who had faced similar struggles, offering support in the way that he had found peace within himself. But the most significant moment came when Barron, now more confident in his voice, spoke at a charity event for at-risk youth. He stood before the crowd, nervous at first, but as he looked out at the young faces staring back at him, he knew he had a responsibility, not just to his past, but to their futures. "I've been where you are," Barron said, his voice steady. "I felt the sting of being misunderstood, of feeling small in a world that can sometimes be unkind. But what I've learned is that you don't have to carry the weight of that forever. You can let it go. You can rise above it. And that's what I'm here to tell you. You are stronger than you think." The room was silent for a moment, and then one by one, the audience began to clap. Barron's message of forgiveness, strength, and resilience was not only a lesson for the young people in the crowd, but for everyone in attendance. That night, Barron went to bed with a sense of fulfillment. The journey wasn't over, but he knew that confronting his past, forgiving those who had hurt him, and being open about his vulnerabilities had changed him in ways he never expected. And the best part? He had finally stepped into the person he had always been meant to be. Strong, compassionate, and ready to inspire others to do the same. As Barron looked out over the city from his bedroom window, he knew that life would always have its challenges, but now he had the tools to face them. It was a victory that went beyond confronting one person. It was about overcoming the doubts, the insecurities, and the fear that held him back. And that was just the beginning of his journey. As Barron's reputation began to shift, so did his relationships with the people around him. He noticed a growing respect from peers, from friends who had once seen him as just another child of privilege, and even from the press. He had taken a step that no one had expected, one that showed the world he was more than just a child of famous parents. He was someone with heart, with values, and someone who was determined to leave a positive mark. The media, of course, couldn't resist spinning the story. Headlines praised Barron for not just confronting a bully, but for the grace he had shown in doing so. It wasn't just a redemption story for him. It was a story that resonated with people from all walks of life. Barron had demonstrated that strength wasn't just physical or financial. It was emotional, and it came from within. And people couldn't stop talking about it. He started receiving messages from strangers, people who had seen themselves in his struggle. Parents wrote him letters thanking him for showing their children that it was okay to be vulnerable, to embrace their weaknesses and work through them. Barron began to realize that his experience wasn't just a moment in his own life. It was a turning point for others as well. But amid all the recognition, Barron knew that the real test of his growth would come when he was face to face with Jake again. The first meeting had been transformative, but Barron knew that the story wasn't complete without seeing Jake once more. The weight of their shared history still lingered in his heart, and he wanted to make sure that this chapter closed not just for him, but for Jake as well. Weeks passed and Barron's confidence grew. He became a more active figure in the media, appearing at events and giving interviews about his experiences with bullying, forgiveness, and personal growth. But he never lost sight of the most important lesson he had learned. Redemption was a process, not an instant transformation. Then one crisp fall afternoon, as Barron was preparing for another charity event, he received an unexpected call. It was Jake. "Barron, it's me." "Jake," the voice on the other end said, sounding unsure. "I know you probably didn't expect to hear from me again, but I've been thinking a lot." Barron paused, recognizing the voice from his past, but also hearing the sincerity that wasn't there before. "Jake," he replied, his tone cautious but not unkind. I just wanted to say, I didn't expect you to react the way you did that day," Jake continued. "I mean, I thought you'd, I don't know, get angry or fight back or something like that. But you didn't. You just stood there, calm, and it made me think. Made me rethink a lot of things. Actually," Barron felt a rush of emotion in his chest, a mix of old resentment and newfound understanding. He could tell that Jake was different now. There was no anger in his voice, no defensiveness, just an openness Barron had never heard before. "You've been on my mind, Barron," Jake said, almost as if confessing something. "I've been trying to figure out how to fix things, how to make things right." Barron took a breath, reflecting on the painful years that had been marked by Jake's bullying. But as he listened to Jake's words, he realized that this conversation could be the true final step in their journey. It wasn't about holding on to old grudges. It was about letting go and moving forward. For both of them. "You don't have to fix anything, Jake," Barron said after a long pause. "What happened is in the past. What matters now is what we do with today." The line fell silent for a moment. Barron could almost hear Jake processing the weight of those words, and then the breakthrough came. "Can we meet? I mean, really meet? Not for a fight, not for an argument, but as two guys who are just trying to figure things out." Jake asked. Barron thought for a moment, then nodded to himself, as though making a decision that had been waiting for this exact moment. "Yeah, let's meet." The day came when they finally sat down together, face to face, without the weight of their past looming over them. There was no bitterness between them anymore. Just two people acknowledging the past, but choosing to let it go in the pursuit of something better. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Jake said, his voice steady but apologetic. "But I want to. I want to make it right, Barron." Barron looked at him, seeing a different person from the one he had known years ago. A man who had grown, who had learned something he hadn't known before. And Barron, with the wisdom he had gained through his own journey, knew that there was nothing to forgive. In that moment, they were both free. "I already have," Barron said simply. As they stood up and shook hands, the bond between them had shifted. They were no longer defined by their past, but by the strength they had found in the present. And that was enough. Barron's journey of redemption, of confronting the ghosts of his past and embracing the man he had become, had come full circle. But even more than that, he had shown the world that true strength came from growth, from kindness, and from knowing when to let go. And as Barron walked away from that moment, he knew he had done more than just heal himself. He had healed the past, and in doing so, he had set himself free.